Welcome to Carousel. I'm Marcelle Soviero, your host, and today we are going to hop on the carousel and meet interesting people and talk about interesting topics. Today I'm really honored to have with me Hilary Levey Friedman, who is a Harvard and Princeton educated sociologist and author of Playing to Win: Children in a Competitive Culture, which was released in September to great reviews. And we're going to start talking about how Hilary became a sociologist and really what sociology is, because it's a bit misunderstood. Please.
Well, you know, most people say, you're a sociologist, are you a social worker? That's what most people think. Right. And I admit that I had never really heard of sociology before I started college and my freshman year. And I sort of stumbled upon a sociology class my very first semester. And I suddenly realized, wow, there's a social science discipline that incorporates all of these other fields that I'm interested in. So if I want to do history, if I want to do political science, even if I want to do literature, that is all encapsulated in the discipline. And so for me, that was really exciting to discover that.
Absolutely, I can imagine. But then you began a dissertation at Harvard that you're now working toward a book related to that. But why don't you tell us how you became interested in competition among children and how your first book, which was just released in September actually, came to be?
Well, this story goes back a ways. It goes back to 1999. So after I discovered that sociology class, that was in the fall of 1998. I'm really dating myself here. But the next year I decided, okay, I'm going to major in sociology.
Right.
And there was a class that was required for everyone who's going to major in sociology. And you had to do a semester-long research project. And some people were doing sort of self-segregation in the dining halls, that sort of thing. And I said, you know, there's so many interesting things going on out there in the world. And one of the big stories at the time was the JonBenet Ramsey murder. And I discovered that there wasn't really a lot done, serious research on child beauty pageants. And I have somewhat of a personal connection to the world of beauty pageants. I myself have never competed, but I have a family history and I had been exposed to them. So I thought, you know, this would be really fun to do, and I'd be able to go to a few, interview people, do a survey, do some observations. And at the end of that class, the teaching fellow and the professor said, wow, this is so great, this could be a bigger project. And so that sort of set me on the path to being a professional sociologist. And one of the things I found in that thesis was that kids younger than ever, I actually saw a 5-week-old carried on stage, were being exposed to these competitive environments. Now, of course, that 5-week-old was sleeping, basically. They had no idea what was going on. But, you know, there are opportunities now for 2, 3, 4-year-olds to be competing. Right. But everyone was so caught up, oh my goodness, these moms are so crazy. And I wasn't able to delve more into that question of why is there so much competition in American childhood today. So when I was starting research for this next project, I said, let me examine this question. Let me see how parents are raising their kids, but let me do it with more common childhood activities. Great. So that's why in Playing to Win, I focus on dance, soccer, and chess. So most little girls will take a dance class at some point. And with soccer, actually they say now, more kids play soccer than any other youth sport these days.
Yeah. So that's sort of, I don't want to jump ahead, but there's a wonderful chapter in the book about gender stereotypes among competitive children, and you just sort of touched on that. So what did you find in your research related to boys and girls competing? What was the difference? What was similar?
So the most interesting finding is really when it comes to the girls. And so specifically when we look at dance and soccer, they're both physical activities. And parents gave very similar explanations at first about why their girls started in one of those two activities. They'd say, oh, she was really active, she had lots of energy, she liked to move her body.
Right.
Well, those are really different choices to make, competitive dance versus competitive soccer.
Right.
So when I looked deeper at this question, one of the things I did, and this is one of the things sociologists do, is we look at people as groups and their background characteristics, not just as individuals, and we group them together. And so I discovered that the parents of girls who were involved with soccer tended to be more upper middle class, more education, more professional managerial careers, higher income. And the dance parents, for the most part, tended to be what we might think of as more lower middle class.
Okay.
So, people are broadly defined as middle class. I had a few really working class families with dance as well, but the soccer families as a whole were far more affluent and actually far more white. So I was like, well, something's going on here.
Right.
And it was only with dance that I ever heard any explanations about how a child looked. One mom told me, well, dance keeps her at a nice weight. And I never heard that with soccer, even though obviously that's true for
It's
soccer
important.
as well.
Right, right. That's very interesting.
So that's one of the big things, is that sort of the more affluent upper middle class parents are directing their girls toward athletic events where you're encouraged to be more aggressive and just valuing slightly different things than the dance competition, which is still putting a value on appearance. And it's a system where everyone gets something at a competition,
right.
Which is different than a soccer game where, there might be a tie, but pretty much there's always going to be a winner and a loser.
Right, right. Which sort of brings me to the history of competition. I know certainly when I was a child, we went outside and we played kick the can, and that was our fun, and that's what we did. And it seems like today, it definitely is the case, that more kids are in organized activities. And what's your take on that, on organized activities and children getting sort of competitive on that level?
Well, it is a big change that we have so many organized activities that are specifically run by adults. Not only are they run by adults, but when the competition is introduced, we keep a record.
Okay.
And there's a record if there's a winner and a loser. In fact, with chess specifically, every child that plays in a tournament, every person that plays in a tournament that's officially sanctioned by the United States Chess Federation gets a number. And you can go online and you can search and find the results for that number and that child and see all of their official tournament results.
Really?
Which is very different than you might remember who won Kick the Can. Someone else might remember it differently.
Right, exactly.
But this way there gets to be a record. And so that is a very big change. We can attribute that to a few different things over time. So the first is the rise of the suburbs and the importance of the car. Also, the perception that childhood is not safe. That it's not safe to just let your kids go play outside.
Go play anymore, yeah.
Fears about kidnapping, those sorts of things. Because there were several high-profile cases, and it made parents very nervous, even though statistically it's very rare. Right. You don't want to be that statistic.
Right, right.
So those are that's part of the explanation about why these developed. But it's also related to a lot of changes in the educational system.
Okay.
So it started to become more difficult to get into college, particularly in the 70s. After World War II, obviously, with the GI Bill. But as the baby boomers aged,
right.
And were getting ready to go to college, there were still just a finite number of slots. And so it became, how do we judge, how do we decide who's going to get into the nation's elite universities? And there had already been an established practice at a lot of particularly Ivy League schools to take into account sports and clubs and activities and not just grades and test scores. And so suddenly this world of organized activities became even more institutionalized, and this bureaucracy developed around them.
So do you see for parents today, a mother of teenagers myself who are getting ready for college, that those extracurricular activities really are that important for college entrances, and schools really do look at that?
Well, it depends what schools you're applying to. Certainly if you're looking at Ivy Leagues, the most elite liberal arts schools, but even a lot of the public schools, top public schools in particular, UVA, University of Michigan, University of California system, all of these schools will take that into account. And there are some schools where you just submit your test scores and your GPA and your record. But most schools will ask for an essay, a personal essay. Most schools ask for your accomplishments. And that makes it very important. Now, the thing that's very interesting about sports, particularly in the U.S., is that a huge number of college students are NCAA athletes.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean they're getting scholarships. In fact, the chances of getting NCAA money, it's less than getting into Harvard. It's about, I want to say it's about 3% right now to get an NCAA scholarship. It's about 6% to get into Harvard. So to get the money is not a super realistic goal, because so many people play sports in high school. But it can give you an admissions advantage.
Exactly. Okay.
And even small schools, maybe that have 500 students, they still are filling their sports teams. They're still filling their rosters.
Right.
And so that becomes especially important in a lot of instances.
Okay, that makes sense. Now you have a 2-year-old, Karsten, and you're pregnant
Yes.
with your next baby boy. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But you've actually had experience with Karsten at a young age with swimming, even in terms of being competitive at this age. And I had that experience with my children. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So when my son was about 7 months old, we decided, my husband and I decided, okay, well, let's do swim lessons for him, both as something to do outside of the house. And also, honestly, neither my husband nor I are very good swimmers. I still, when I jump in the pool, plug my nose. When you can get me in a bathing suit, I still plug my nose. And my husband is a great runner and does other things very well, but a swimmer he is not.
Right.
So we thought, oh, and this is a safety thing. Not that we have a pool, but you should know how to swim.
Right.
So we decided there was a program that had been advertising a lot near our house through our local Jewish community center called the Lenny Krazelberg program. And there, like many things in life, there are different levels that you can be a part of. And so after the first lesson, my husband hands my son to me getting out of the pool, and he says, you know, what do you think was the youngest age for the level 2 swimmer? And I just looked at him and I thought, wow, this is how all that competition starts when you're very young.
Because he had a little 7-month-old,
Yeah.
and he's asking, like, when can that child advance to the next stage?
Yeah, and
It's
he
funny
wanted
how
to
we
be
do that.
the youngest to advance to the next stage. That was his
Not
goal.
just to advance. Oh, that's
Yes.
wonderful. Talk a little bit about, there are shows like Dance Mom and some others where, you know, this competition is literally brought to the masses through these reality TV shows. What do you think of that sort of thing?
Well, the reality TV shows have some problems, mainly because it's manufactured drama. And actually a lot of the dance studios, some of the dance studios I worked with when I was researching Playing to Win, they say, we have noticed a change in our parents' behavior since the show has been on the air.
Wow.
And you can think about it too, if you watch like The Real Housewives on Bravo and see all these people yelling and screaming and fighting, you start thinking, oh, maybe that's okay. So there's a slight problem with a show like that and, you know, parents sort of doing extreme things to get more screen time.
Right, right.
You know, at the same time, it can expose people to a world that they hadn't been familiar with and say, oh, this might be a great opportunity for my child. I wasn't aware this existed. And so it can go both ways. But all the drama on these TV shows is not a good thing for anyone.
Right. And that's an interesting point, because as a sociologist, my assumption is that you research all the possibilities without judgment and
Yes.
sort of bring that research to the surface, which is that how you went about building your book?
Yes, and having the experience of studying the child beauty pageants gave me a really good opportunity to not be judgmental. But it's interesting because if you know, hopefully people will read the book and they'll see that for the majority of the book, it's really based on the data, based on the research, based on a lot of you know, historical research and all those sorts of things. But then at the end, you know, people will say, well, what do you think? You know,
Right.
we want to know what
you
you
think.
think. We want your
Right.
advice. And so there is some of that in the conclusion, but as an
Right.
academic, you know, you're trained to be an impartial observer and take things down as much as you can to present both sides. And so I like to say, you know, people say, is this a book about crazy parents? And I'm like, well, some of the people might be, but it's not a diatribe against them. It's not an indictment of them. I'm trying to put all of this into context. How did we get here? How are these decisions made? How could we end up those people who, you know, go to the swimming pool and say, what's the youngest age to advance? Or how do you spend a weekend how do you end up spending a whole weekend in the basement of a school cafeteria at a chess tournament?
At a chess tournament when your kid is 2, you know.
Yes, exactly.
No, that's interesting. Which brings me to, in researching a book like that, Competition Among Kids, what was the most revealing piece? I mean, you did a lot of research for this book. What did you find was like your aha moment or your most interesting interview? Or
Well, I'll give you two different answers there because I interviewed both parents and children.
Okay.
So with the parents, one of the things that stuck with me the most, it's actually a woman who I write about at the beginning of chapter 3,
Okay.
who is very, very, very involved in her daughter's lives. But I'll never forget, she said to me, and this was before I had children, before I was even married, that I was doing this research. And I just keep going back to it as a parent myself now. She said, parenting is one big experiment, and we won't know till much later if we did it right.
If we did it right.
If ever.
Right.
Is my coda to that.
Right.
And so that has really stuck with me, and I really feel like all the parents I met over all the different research projects I've done, not just for this book, are coming from a place of wanting the best for their children.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of that might be misguided at times, but no one's seeking out to mess up their children's lives. Exactly.
Right. So
that really stayed with me a lot.
Yeah.
And the second thing was I loved doing the interviews with the kids. I interviewed 37 children. And actually my first interview was with a girl who plays chess. She's now in high school. And I had interviewed about 40 parents by that point, both in chess and soccer. So I'd heard lots of different reasons why you get your children involved.
Right.
But when I sat down and I interviewed this young woman who was in 3rd grade at the time, you know, I said, what's your favorite thing about playing chess? And she looked at me and she said, I love that I make friends who go to other schools.
Aww.
And I was blown away, not because it didn't make sense, but because that was nowhere on the radar of the parents.
For the parents, right.
And that was the most important thing to her. And I heard that then all the time from kids. You know, dance girls would say, when I go to dance, I make friends who go to other schools and they get me. Right. And they like doing the same things I do.
It's funny.
And kids want to make other connections. And that's a big thing that I got from the book. People say, are these kids stressed? And I'm like, you know what, they're having fun, and this is their social setting, and this is how they make friends.
Right,
So anyway, those are two of the things that really stand out to me when I think about my research experience.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And as we were just saying, of course, everybody in the end wants advice or practical tips from the sociologist to sort of let us know what might be the right things with our children when it comes to competitive sports. What can you offer our viewers?
Well, on a general level, I like to tell people that they should approach their kids' activities as if childhood is a buffet. And you want to lay out a lot of different options for your kids. And what is going to be on your buffet is going to be conditioned both by your background and where you live. So if you're up here in New England area, hockey might be more prominent than if you lived in Texas, and it might be football.
Right.
Or some parents will want the free-range eggs, the organic eggs. Other parents will have the grits. But what you want to do is expose your children to a range of things, and then let them see, what do I want to go back and get seconds of? What speaks to me? And so I think that that's, you know, and what it might be might not be your first choice. You know, of course you're going to make that a choice and expose your kids to it.
Right.
But at the same time, you want them to have a say. So that's my sort of general piece of advice for parents. I have more specific tips, but that's a good overall one.
And you were saying at some point in the book, you talk about parents sort of once that taste is developed and your child wants to play chess or soccer or whatever, sort of really researching and getting to know who the coaches are or the instructors are for that particular skill.
That's
so
right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it might surprise some people, but you could go next week and say, I'm going to open a dance studio down the road. There are no regulations. You couldn't do that with a nail salon or lots of other things, but you could do that with kids where you're training their bodies and teaching them and all that sort of thing. And so, you know, there might be a dance studio nearby that has been open for a long time and that has a great reputation, but the teacher might still not have the proper training.
Okay.
And so you want to ask, what training do you have in whatever the field is? If it's tennis, if it's golf, if it's a music lesson, what's your experience? And then you also want to find out with people who are working with youngsters, and beyond a Jerry Sandusky, make sure they're not a pedophile issue. Do you have any educational training?
Right.
Have you done any coursework or do you have any degrees to know how to deal with an 8-year-old girl who's crying after her soccer team loses versus a 12-year-old boy, you know, who's dealing with various issues, maybe going through puberty or those sorts of things. And kids at different ages, different sexes, different places in their lives will respond to learning and sportsmanship and all these issues in different ways. So you want to make sure that people have the proper training to be working with your children. We wouldn't send our kids to a school that's not properly credentialed.
Properly trained. Exactly. So I think the other thing I read in the book is another reason, of course, to have that is so you know the teacher, instructor, coach is well prepared to do their work, and you as the parent can step out.
Yes.
I think you feel that's important at some point for the parent, no matter what the age of the child is. If you know your instructor is good, once you have that comfortability, just step out.
Yes, and that's in the best interest of everyone involved.
Yeah.
That's in the best interest of your child, of the teacher or coach, and it's also in your best interest. And that's something that a lot of parents don't get, and they feel like, I'm investing this time, my child's time, I'm investing this, really financial commitment,
right.
Which can be quite substantial in some of these activities, but you have to trust that the teacher or coach knows more than you do to teach the right technique or to make the right decision for the group. And if you get too involved, that's detrimental to everyone on some level. Now, there's an opportunity to be involved. Of course, you could volunteer as a team mom, do snacks and those sort of things. But you need to leave the decisions up to the teacher or coach and not try to interfere and think you know best.
Right, and that comes really clear in the book. And again, that first book by Hilary is Playing to Win, Raising Children in a Competitive Culture. Now what I'd really like to talk about is your next project on the horizon, which is extremely interesting. So we don't have too much time left, but do tell us what you're up to.
So I'm working on a book going back to the child beauty pageant research.
Okay.
So talking about what I learned all those years ago, doing that research about why parents, specifically moms, are getting their young daughters 6 and under involved in pageantry. And now I'm able to go and find what are they doing now. So that's one of the big questions we have. What does this mean in kids' lives and girls' lives? Does it make a difference later on?
So what is the tentative title for the new book coming out?
It's called Here She Is, My Journey Through the World of Beauty Pageants as Miss America's Daughter. So that reveals my personal link there.
Oh, there you go.
So I have never competed in a beauty pageant at all, but my mother is a former Miss America. And so I was exposed to this world when I was very young. Have some understanding of how it works, have an appreciation for it as well. I can be critical, but I can also see the positives and see what it can do for women. And so,
right,
yeah.
But I could imagine that not every child of a Miss America is a Harvard sociologist.
Yeah, I think
it's kind of an interesting path that you took.
It's true. I'm the bookworm who likes glitz and glamour, as I like to say, who can appreciate it and enjoy it. And I know a lot about the history of the Miss America pageant, let's say,
right.
How it's evolved over time, how it's changed with women's position in society. And so that will be a component of the book as well. And also tell my story of how I ended up, from Michigan with the Coke bottle glasses and the buck teeth to studying sequins at Harvard.
Right, yeah, and sociology. Well, that's really interesting. And so to sort of wrap up, your next project is the beauty pageants. The current project is our competitive kids. And what do you see beyond that?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm sure that my children are going to direct me to certain things. To the next topic.
Right.
This is my second boy. I'm an only child, so I'm really interested in how siblings will interact.
Yes.
There's I haven't been able to find a lot of great research on that, so I could see eventually that might be part of the story. And then, as I like to say, life is long, and we'll see. I don't think we do one thing for our whole lives. So.
No, clearly you don't. You're really research all these different topics. It's very interesting. So my pleasure to have you, Hilary, and good luck with your books.
Thank you.
And your writing, and I trust that you'll do great things.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Sorry. And I guess there's one more question before we leave, which is to say, you've got a new little guy coming.
Yes.
You're having your next baby. And what is the advice that you would give to parents?
Oh, goodness. Well, don't be afraid to ask for help.
I like that. I like that. Helps in all aspects.
And if you have lots of family nearby who you trust and you won't argue with over different parenting things, well, no, because we were very into the swaddle, and some people think you can't swaddle the kids,
right?
So different things like that, because parenting fads go in and out of fashion.
They do.
But also, don't be afraid. The same way that I learned in my research, investigate who you're working with, find an expert, that sort of thing. find an expert in whatever you need, because there's someone out there. There's a baby sleep coach. There's a lactation consultant. There's someone for everything.
It's true.
And
there's a book for everything, as you and I both know. We're both big readers.
And if there isn't, we should write it.
I love it.
Yeah.
That makes good sense. Well, I thank you again for being on the show. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
You.